It is such a small light, isn't it? A candle. Not even enough to light up a small room. so easily blown out, so hard to get started, but a fragment of light. And yet only a fragment is enough. In the night, we look up to the sky and see the stars. And when we see them, we know where we are. The sailor with the sextant divines the spot in the ocean by looking at the stars, a mere point of light, a flame so remote we cannot see it flicker. And yet it was such a star, just a star, that gave those wise ones from the east occasion for joy. And they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy to see a star, a small light. In this season when we have reached the ridgepole of the year, where daylight threatens to vanish altogether, we look for pinpricks of light. And when we see them, we rejoice with exceeding great joy that we may still continue our journeys. The candle of joy, just a fragment, a small flame, will now be lit by Lordy Clark. And now it's time for you to give joy to the morning as we join together in song, Once in Royal David's City, a grand old song of the season found as hymn number 228. What lovely words with share the truth this season brings. It is the custom in this church to hear the nativity story. There are actually two, spoken by those young enough to be students, but who serve today as teachers. And so I'm inviting those two young folk to come and join us. Come on up here. I'm going to get out of the way in just a moment, but I want to make sure we see you and introduce you and thank you. I have 2 out of 3 pennies, do I not? Mm-hmm. Which ones are we today? Leela and Georgia. That's right. Don't be shy. I know your mother. She's not shy. But Leela and Georgia will now read from the book of Luke and be our teachers this morning. Thank you so much.
In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn.
In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was the angel and a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors."
When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known that what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, as it had been told them.
You didn't hear the story of the wise people because that's in a whole other book of the New Testament. We tend to blend them together, but they're really separate stories. So you've just heard one story, and now you get to enact the other, because the story says they came and bestowed gifts. Your gift every week helps to move us forward as a community and into the community. Every week in Advent, we lift up a particular group that we have worked with in the past that tells us, that works on things that matter to us. The Grand Rapids Red Project, with whom we have worked in the past, advocates for people with HIV, a community that may not be as afflicted as we thought 30 years ago, but is nonetheless very real and very present. They help to care for, care about, and stand up for those who are dealing with illness that people don't like to talk about. So I invite you now to share your offering this week, half of which will support this institution and half of which will go to the Grand Rapids Red Project. For are these not the least among those? And those are the ones to whom we are called most to serve. Your offering will now be most gratefully received.
Super
So, Nata Lux, does that mean light is born? As my vestigial Latin knows about that much. And you'll hear that again on Christmas Eve. And the composer Morton Lauridsen has a very powerful and affecting style. I really appreciate the choir sharing it this month, and also doing multiple versions of a text that goes way back. The text is O Magnum or Magnum Mysterium, O Great Mystery. It's a Christmas text out of the Roman tradition. And you've already heard a couple of versions of it, and you'll hear yet another on Tuesday, one from the great Venetian composer Gabrieli. And it's meant for two choirs, but you're going to hear a choir of voices and a choir of brass. So it's going to be a big mystery. Lots of rich sounds. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the mystery of joy. Okay, where to start? This is tough. They get tougher every week, I got to tell you. Well, let me put it this way. I have to chase demons out of my head whenever I start these things, the little weird things that pop into my head. I was talking to Linda Jones, our interim choir director, because you do something often enough and eventually strange things come into your mind. We do something every year at the beginning of Advent. We call it the hanging of the greens. And my bizarre head imagines a whole family condemned to die. And then, of course, when you deck the halls, I think of a bar fight, but that's another question. So when it came to joy, what naturally came to mind was Ren and Stimpy. Somebody heard that. Ren and Stimpy was a cartoon show about 20 years ago. It was obnoxious, it was crude, my children loved it, and I tried to get them to avoid it as often as I could. If you don't remember, and I pushed it out of my mind most of the time, it is about two bizarre animated characters, a cruel chihuahua with bloodshot eyes and a dim-witted cat that doesn't know what's going on. And they careen around in frantic ways, doing all sorts of things that are of questionable morality and safety. And sometimes they broke into a weird dance that we all know is called Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy. And that's what came into my mind when I think about joy. And it didn't make me happy to see it when they launched it, and joy, well, let's not even get there. If you don't know about Ren and Stimpy or Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy, there is YouTube. That's where you find it. But do not say I did not warn you. But let's be honest. Christmas loves joy. Joy to the world. Rejoice, Emmanuel. Sing we joyous all together, fa la la. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too. And I understand enough wassail really gets the joy moving upward too. And all those angels you just heard about bringing tidings of great joy, and wise people rejoicing exceedingly with great joy. Roll in the merries and the happies, and pretty soon I'm in Ren and Stimpy territory, just imagining it all. But then what naturally comes up as my inner Scrooge. What have you to be merry about? Says he to his nephew. You're poor enough. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot that went about with Merry Christmas upon his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Actually, I have no quarrel with happy or merry or joy. What bothers me is that they are so casually said, so readily done. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, we say as if it were easy. Real merriment, real happiness, real joy isn't easy. It takes work. Now, there's a paradox I realize. How can joy be work? Shouldn't it be spontaneous, instinctive, natural, exuberant? Oh, well, maybe, but I'm going to recourse to a better mind than I. a wonderful poet, Adrienne Rich. She is also a prophet of women's spirit and women's power. And she penned a poem called Transcendental Etude, written back in the mid-70s. A part of it appears in our hymn book. The part that's there reads, "No one ever told us we had to study our lives, to make of our lives a study as if learning natural history or music, that we should begin with the simple exercises first and slowly go on trying the hard ones, practicing till strength and accuracy become one with the daring to leap into transcendence." And in fact, we can't live like that. We take on everything at once before we've even begun to read or mark time. We're forced to begin in the midst of the hard movement, the one already sounding when we are born. As a former and failed musician, this metaphor seems to me quite apt. I spent hours running fingers up and down keys, over keyboards, scales, arpeggios, first position, second position, third position. And you do this in some sense to grind down the nerves as you file your nails, drumming and numbing them into submission. Not so you can tell them what to do, but so they'll know what to do when they can take off like a border collie that knows where to go without being told. What seems effortless in that moment takes years to obtain. But when it happens, and the fingers fly up the keyboard or along the fingerboard, that's joy. And it took work. True joy really is a leap into transcendence, but you have to work up to it. Think of the pole vaulter standing there looking at the goal ahead, who, having practiced long and hard, jumping and falling, failing again and again, finally has the poise and the wisdom holding that pliant pole, and then knowing exactly how fast to run, how fast to accelerate, when to stick the pole in the spot, and how to push their legs up so high that they reach the point in a parabola where they are just at the point where Earth demands they return. And they let go, and their hands spread out, and at that moment, for a split second, they make the Earth wait for them to return. And that too is joy, which is not watching a tree or drinking wassail. Were it not for this sermon, I would not have gone deeper into Adrienne Rich's poem. I read it all. I commend it to you. Read that before you find Ren and Stimpy. Because right after the part I read to you, which comes out of the middle, is this part. Trying to sight read what our fingers can't keep up with, learn by heart what we can't even read, and yet it is this we were born to. We aren't virtuosi or child prodigies. There are no prodigies. And we're not performers like Liszt competing against the world for speed and brilliance. Oh, how I wish I read that 30, 40 years ago. Living in this world that measures worth by wealth and power and by accomplishments that we share at parties casually between hors d'oeuvres. Well, in my latest book, I said, but we all curate our lives now, don't we? I hate that verb, to curate. As if meaningful life requires organizing all of our stuff in a decent diorama so that people will notice and go ooh and ah and approve. Rich continues. But there come times, perhaps this is one of them, when we have to take ourselves more seriously or die. When we have to pull back from the incantations, rhythms we have moved to thoughtlessly, and disenthrall ourselves. Oftentimes this season seems to me one of those rhythms we have moved through thoughtlessly, automatically, like the arrival of Christmas goods along the residual Halloween candy. As though by rote and habit we can become joyful because it's December the 1st. Am I feeling joy? Well, I have a day or two to catch up. The wreath is on the door, check. The cards are addressed, check. The lights are on the tree, check. Feeling joy, check. If we are not all virtuosi of life, neither are we excused, though, from practicing the scales of rejoicing, which is what Auden called it. We have to practice the scales of joy. Listen, I have something to say, and not much time to say it. Something I need to say to myself as I do to you. If you wish to leap into transcendence, to defy the gravitation of habit, to escape the enthrallments of appearances, it will take work. Fortunately, it is not hard. You already know how. As Rich comes to the end of her poem, she writes, as if a woman quietly walked away from the argument and jargon in a room, and sitting down in the kitchen began turning in her lap bits of yarn, calico, and velvet scraps, laying them out absently on the scrubbed boards in the lamplight. Can you see that picture? I've seen my mother do such a thing. Like the banners behind me here, joy has to be sewn together, fashioned from what Adrian Rich goes on to say, the dark blue petal of the petunia, the dry dark brown lace of seaweed, not forgotten either, the shed silver whisker of the cat, the spiral of paper wasp nest curling beside the finch's yellow feather. That's how we make joy. We gather it together from the fragments, the bits and pieces of life that catch our eye and remain in our view. Here in this church, we call them faith, hope, and love. These are the ingredients of joy, as simple as flour and water and salt. But if you add work and time and luck, it will become bread. But absent any one of these, especially the luck, and you get something that didn't rise quite as high as you hoped. Back in August, I was kayaking along the placid Black River, and lest you think this is something I do well, I was a guest of the kayak club. They provided the kayak and the paddle and also the extra things I would need, and I went as much to be the good pastor as I was for fun. These are all church members, and being with them is a joy. More than once I ran aground on a sandbar or got caught in some thicket of branches with a tree fallen over. But as I went along, as the day went along, I began to sense the current riding along with me, or me riding along with it. And I could begin to see beneath the shadows and the glint on the water, the rocks in the river. I began to trust that the river would move me, even though I couldn't feel it directly, and sense there was a path through the river, even though I couldn't see it with my eyes. I felt a desire to merge and embrace and be embraced by it. Ahead was a choice without clear direction. There was a log, there was another. There were two openings. Which one was the right one? I didn't know. I slipped my oar slightly to one side. The bow turned exactly as I wanted it. The river lifted me oh so little, and I slipped over the sandbar between the branches and pushed beyond and floated into the pool. And that was joy. It is the creation from the pieces of life, the flotsam and jetsam, the feather from the bird the cat left on the doorstep, the lint from the dryer, the crumbs from the bread. Such a composition has nothing to do with eternity, says Adrian Rich. The striving for greatness, brilliance, only with the musing of a mind one with her body, experienced fingers quietly pushing dark against bright, silk against roughness, pulling the tenets of life together with no mere will to mastery, only care for the many-lived, unending forms in which she finds herself. There it is, isn't it? Care for the many lived forms. Take the fragments of yourself, the singer, the worshiper, the preacher, the son, the daughter, the father, the mother, the sister, the friend, the neighbor, the one who is good at sewing, the one who can do nothing but appreciate the artist. Take the fragments of all of you, and all of us are so many people. Gather them. Gather up the faith, the hope, and the love. Put them out on the scrubbed boards of the day. Arrange them in a diorama that says, here is my life. Here is this moment. The mystery of joy is that it must be made. It comes when the loaf rises more than you expected. When the note rings out of your voice and it perfectly matches exactly the person singing next to you. It is the stitch that holds and holds and holds. Joy comes when we gather all those pieces together, the faith and hope and love together, not by magic incantations, not by habits or checklists or curated moments of pleasure. Joy comes when we knead life like dough and feel the silken texture of the gluten and see the bubble that arises from the yeast. It comes when we sew the stitch and there's just enough thread at the end to tie it off. When you push the iron across the shirt and the crease is exactly where you want it to be. When you push the paddle into the water and the river carries you over the sandbar. Whenever we conspire with the world, surrender ourselves to it, and at the same time gather it to us, on those moments we can vault to the edge of transcendence. And though we must return to earth in a moment, at that moment, there, hovered above all of it, suspended only for a split second, arms spread wide, legs pushing to move further, at that moment, free of the earth. That is joy. I wish that to you this season, but also every day, that the moments of life afford you a moment to gather up the faith and hope and love and vault, paddle, bake, sew, listen, weep, whatever it is you do, into transcendence, because that is the mystery of joy. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. We'll keep this in order now. I'm going to do some praying. Then we'll have some silence. Then I'm going back up there because I want to honor the dead. And then the choir, you're going to add a little amen-like thing to that. Whatever it is, it'll be beautiful. Did you see my socks? They're red. I'm wearing a lot of red today. So are you. In a few moments, the spiritual expressions group, also in red, will be blessing us. As I was sitting there earlier and you were all singing, I realized I recognize almost all of you. And not only that, I have heard stories from almost all of you. I'm sure I've forgotten most of them. And I won't tell any of them because they belong to you and me. But somewhere in the first hymn, it talked about kneeling, didn't it? Did anyone remember that? Somewhere in the once in Royal David City, kneeling before the babe. I kneel before you for the gift of your stories, for the gift of your presence. I kneel before you as one grateful to have been in your life, imperfectly, inadequately, but honestly. I kneel before you because you each have lives more precious than I can imagine. And I would bid you at some point not to kneel to me or even to God, but to each other. To acknowledge the immense gift that each of you is. You have fashioned joy in this house, all of you, if only for a moment. I've seen some of you vault over that bar. I've seen some of you bring the gift of your food and nourishment, those who have made things and done things. I kneel to you, all of you Christ childs in this room. And my prayer is that you receive my adoration as genuine, because it is. We live in a world in which confidence becomes braggadocio and braggadocio becomes power, and humility is weakness. I am the weakest man in this room. And I count it a gift. So for all my sins, I ask your forgiveness, but for the gift of your presence this past year, I offer gratitude and praise. I bid you pray the same thing, to look about and realize everyone around you is worthy of our reverence, worthy of kneeling, worthy of our worship. May we pause inwardly and silently as we kneel one to another. I lift up now the names of those worthy of our kneeling, whose lives have been completed in years past, but whose gift to us remains perpetual. Rhonda Fabro, Francis Shaw, Ben Bedstead, Mary Reardon, Leon Bile, Elsie Pierce, Vern Parker, Jack Bowers, Mary Hoke, John McHugh, John Yakey, Clarence Zelstra, Natalie Johnson, Chris Jeffries, Mary Ann Veit. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekinah, amid the ranks of all those who have gone before, who have gone to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally. Bind their souls to you and to we the living, that they may rest in peace, that we may be at peace. And let us say, Amen. And now for something completely different, because it's worthwhile. Our final hymn, Rock of Ages, Let Our Song, reminds us that this is also the season of rededication, of Hanukkah, in which the people of Israel rose up and claimed their land again. This song commemorates that and the sturdy strength of ordinary people to insist on their liberty and justice. Shall we join together in singing hymn number 223, Rock of Ages, Let Our Song. be seated so you can listen and share in this benediction poem. You may have to get closer to the microphone. Don't forget, you join on the last verse.
Welcome to our celebration.
We sing you this song in celebration. Bring your best self, your highest intention,
Your story,
your voice,
your song,
to listen,
to learn, to lead, to grow.
in this house you belong. Enter into
this sacred space,
and then to joy
With
inspiration. Join the mosaic of history.
rest,
reflect,
Renew yourself.
uncover
The layers of mystery. Here we honor each generation. All voices are welcome.
young and old.
to question,
to explore.
To wonder.
Together
we raise a glorious sound that
we
can wake up from placid slumber. If you feel lost
or alone,
in the
in the
crowd
crowd, step through these doors.
and wonder aloud.
Follow the stained glass
These
into this house of prayerful insight.
awaken the world.
With
With hope and with love.
Together we embrace
This moment in time.
we offer the freedom
To open your mind. To nurture the strength. To grow your soul. And become
the light of change.
in this world.
So
Join our song of celebration. Dance for joy with inspiration. Honor every generation. And greet a new world of hope.
And we're done.